Are we ready, Matt, to go live?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. We're ready to start. Thank you very much.
Brilliant.
Thank you, everybody. Good evening and welcome to a very wet and windy again night and this session of Corporate Performance Scrutiny Committee. Before we get going, I'm going to just start with the usual announcements for everyone. This is a remote meeting, so if I can remind everybody present, please, that this meeting is going to be live streamed as well as recorded via the internet. And then this recording will be archived for future viewing. Could all participants please mute themselves when they're not speaking in order to avoid any background noise or feedback when others are speaking? If a participant wishes to speak, can they please raise their hand using the remote hand function? If a participant raises their hand via the remote function and is not subsequently invited to speak by myself, please could they then turn their camera on to indicate or place a message in the chat function. When invited to address by the chair, could all participants ensure that their microphone and camera is on to ensure they can be both seen and heard when actively participating. Again, if this isn't possible for any reason, bring this to the attention of myself and or the Democratic Services Officer as soon as possible. Please can we make sure all debate is conducted verbally and not via that chat function for the sake of the recording, and the chat function should only ever be used to highlight technical issues and or to gain the attention of myself or the Democratic Services Officer. Any participant having difficulty hearing or being heard when they are addressing the committee, can you again get the attention of the Chair or Democratic Services Officer? Please could I then welcome all committee, non-committee elected members, cabinet members, our officers and anyone else at home who's watching the live meeting broadcast. If we go straight to the agenda item part 1, which is apologies for absence, I believe we might have one, Councillor Hamilton, but I'm not sure if we have anyone else, Karen, tonight.
No, Chair, it is you're correct. It's Councillor Hamilton. And for the benefit of those viewing at home, my name is Karen Bowen. I'm the Democratic Services Officer supporting the meeting this evening. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Karen. If we move then to agenda item 2, that's minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of November, 2024. For all members present who I'm sure have read the meeting notes, can we have a hand, please, to move to accept that they are a genuine record of the meeting? Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn, and thank you, Councillor Hanks. That's great. If we move on then to agenda item 3, which is our declarations of interest and the nature of such interests. Do we have any for tonight's meeting? No? Okay, that's marvellous. Thank you. So we'll move on then to agenda item 4. This is our reference from Cabinet that sat on the 28th of November 2024. It's Q2 sickness absence report. So that's from the period April 24 to September 24. And I think we've got Tracy Dickinson with us here today, our officer, to take us through the report. Thank you, Tracy.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Prothero. Can you hear me okay? Because I know my system is a little bit slow in the office. But Councillor Prothero, if I have any problem, I'm going to pop down to the chamber, if that's okay. Yeah, thank you very much. This is just the opportunity to take this committee through the absence report for the period April to September. I don't propose talking through the whole of the report, but I just wanted to draw the committee's attention to a couple of prudent points, really. And that is that from this period, we have seen a slight increase in absence in comparison to the same period of 2023, although we still continue to see a decline from 2022. Our absence statistics in terms of the 4 highest rates of absence continue to be stress work-related and stress non-work-related, viral infection and operation/stroke musculoskeletal. So our focus continues to be in those areas. Our teams meet regularly with all of the relevant DMTs and with schools in relation to sickness absence and the monitoring of sickness absence. And our absence management procedures have robust absence management mechanisms in place that see the regular meetings of every individual to ensure that we're looking after staff wellbeing, in addition to looking at mitigating absence and reducing the incidence and frequency of absence where we can. We've most recently conducted a really light touch review of our absence management policy, and we're undertaking a trial across the next 3 months with a couple of key service user departments, drawing them closer to our occupational health teams and looking at associated phased return to works in relation to long-term sickness absence, in the hope that we might be able to reduce the duration of long-term sickness absence moving forward. So we'd be able to bring back to this committee the success of that trial or not in the next sort of quarter, if that's okay, and something that this group would be interested to hear the results of. Once we are finished with those results, we're also going to do a broader review of our absence management process. We've already compared our absence management process with that of the other 22 local authorities and know that we're broadly similar in that space. But we're going to do a broader review that looks at how we can continue to robustly manage absence management, as well as ensuring that we look after our staff wellbeing, and we will do that in conjunction with our trade union colleagues. We have split out reason for absence across all of our departments. So the appendices, if I draw your attention to the appendices, each appendices will give a breakdown of absence and also a breakdown of absence per directorate and per schools. You will see in those breakdowns on the appendices that in our corporate sector, we've seen an upward trend, unfortunately, from an absence management, whereas schools across the last year have been broadly static in terms of their absence statistics. This committee also asked us to look at the other descriptor that seemed to have a higher incidence of absence across the last year. That's a piece of work that we've been doing since the last Scrutiny committee, and we are going to remove other as a descriptor from April 2025. And we've worked with all of our service users and in comparison with the other 22 local authorities and with our occupational health teams to look at to review the absence descriptors and to do a piece of work with our service users and ensuring that they won't be able to tick other from April 2025, but during the periods between now and April 2025 are really clear with the reason for absence, and rather than ticking the other box, are looking at the most relevant descriptor that could be used. So that's something that we are working on. So from April 2025 moving onwards, you won't see the descriptor of other in future scrutiny reports. I think that's all I wanted to draw the attention of this group to at this point, and welcome any questions.
Thank you very much for that, Tracy. And I'm really pleased to hear that that other category is going to be removed. And I do appreciate that a member of staff does not necessarily have to say at that point what the problem might be. But it did seem, as I looked through the report, that there was quite a inconsistent use of that category of other, with it being at the top of the reasons list for a couple of directorates and then not actually factoring at all in another one's top 5 list. So I think, that's good news to hear that you're going to be removing it. I can see that Councillor Carroll has his hand up, so I'm going to just hand over to him so he can ask his question. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Tracy, for the report. It's just a question, really, with regard to stress, both work-related and non-work-related. Is that taken to include all mental health absences? The reason I ask on that point is obviously the government in particular has been pushing a back to work message across the public sector. And one of the main areas that they've cited is mental health. Now, obviously, that's not included on the table to the best of my knowledge. So I just wanted clarification if stress was taken to include that.
Are you happy for me to come in there, Chair?
Please do,
Yeah.
Tracy.
Thank you, Councillor Carroll. No, it's not the only descriptor we've got for mental health. We do have another descriptor, which is neurological stroke mental health illness. I can't, hands on heart, Councillor Carroll, say that people are not using stress for all mental illness, but moving forwards, we are looking at that category to broaden that category out further. But yes, currently individuals can be ticking stress if they have got other mental health conditions, if that makes sense. So we will be looking at ensuring that we can drill down on that further from descriptors in April 2025.
So that will be included in the next report then?
Yes, yeah, we'll have a new mental health category in. What it won't do, Councillor Carroll, is go through all of the descriptors for mental health. It's more likely to be a generic descriptor, because I'm sure you will appreciate there are quite a number of conditions that can come into that.
I appreciate. Is there a reason it hasn't been included to date? The only reason I ask is this has been a topical issue for some time. I mean, the new government has obviously pushed on this. The previous government had raised it as well. I'm just curious as to why it wasn't an indicator up until now.
I can't answer that question, sorry, Councillor Carroll, other than to say those are the only descriptors that we've used so far. When we are reviewing absence and in discussion with line managers in relation to the absence, we do get more broader information around the reasons for that absence, and we do make referrals to our counselling support services or via Westfield Health, our EAP, to ensure that people are either signposted or getting the most appropriate support for their particular condition. But that's one of the areas that we're looking at from a descriptor perspective from April 2025.
Thank you. No, I welcome the fact that the other category is going to be abolished as well. I think it is important with absence of the statistics that we do. Obviously, you can't list everything under the sun because you'd have a list that would be longer than the report potentially, and you'd be going into individual cases. But I do welcome that, and thank you for the information.
Thank you, Councillor Carroll. Tracy, can I quickly ask then, the descriptors and the different categories, are we taking them from NHS descriptors? Is that so they're aligning with them? Is that what we will do? Thank you. I don't know if we've lost Tracy now. I think she seems
Sorry,
to
can
have...
you hear me?
Oh, here she is.
Can you hear me now?
No, we can.
Oh,
I can now.
apologies.
Thank you.
So in answer to your question, Councillor Prothero, they don't directly come from the NHS descriptors. They are more broader than that. We've looked at from the other 22 local authorities and also what are being utilised from a GP perspective to make sure that we're capturing the most appropriate data that we can be. If that's something you'd like us to look at more broadly, then we'd be happy to take that away and consider it.
Thank you, Tracy. I think it's just more of a question of doing it for consistency and for the authorities' ease of, I suppose, categorisation. But yeah, Councillor Hanks, you have your hand up, so please come in. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Tracy. I was just going to ask the Westfield Health that we provide, is it well used and is it working well, please?
Thanks, Councillor Hanks. We do review the utilisation of Westfield Health. That's been a new provision for us across the last year. We'd previously used a scheme called Care First, And as part of our regular reviews of Care First, we weren't entirely happy with the service that we'd shared with the Care First provider, which was the reason for moving across to Westfield Health. Our early initial review of that has suggested that we've got an improved set of statistics. What that scheme does do is look at signposting people to the most relevant services. And if they don't have the relevant services, then ensuring that those individuals have got appropriate support in place, and that they've also got the ability to call upon a service line on a 24-hour basis. I'm more than happy, Councillor Hanks, to bring some of that analysis to the next meeting if that's something that you would value and welcome. But yes, early indications is showing us that the service is more positively spoken about than it had been in the recent past with the alternative provision.
Okay, lovely. Yes, that would be interesting. Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you, Tracy. Yes, so we'll probably ask for a report, if that's okay. We'll put it as a recommendation at the end. Councillor Johnson, please ask your question.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Tracy. I'd like to welcome the statement from Tracy in relation to the test that the Council is currently undertaking, and also the change in the indicators. A lot of statistics can be found in this report. What's important is that we can use the statistics and how officers use the statistics to make sure that less people are unwell and more people are in work in the council and are healthy. One thing came up as a question for me as part of Appendix B. Looking at a number of missing dates on the basis of month. I note, of course, the fact that there were far fewer absences in August. I take it that this is because schools are not open, and as such, there are no absences in this month. But does this then have some sort of impact on the statistics more broadly if schools are not open? So you would expect to see less absences for a significant or a substantial period during the year. They're not there for counting absences, and therefore people may be unwell, but they're just not missing work days as the schools are not open. Now, hopefully that does make sense as a question, Tracy.
Hi, sorry, Councillor Johnson, can you hear and see me? Mm-hmm. Yeah, yes, it does make sense as a question, and yes, you're right. There will be some sort of not necessarily anomalies, but the schools are off during that period. What I will take back and check for you is obviously we won't have any short-term absence recorded during that period of time because there won't be the necessity to, but our long-term absence will continue to be reported from that period. So you won't see a change in the long-term absence statistics, because if an individual is still off on long-term absence and continues to be off on long-term absence from the September, that will still continue to be within the statistics. Short-term absence, yes, there will be an impact because those schools are off, and therefore we won't get any recording of short-term absence in that time. It would may be interesting to look at, Councillor Johnson, whether the timeliness of the reporting back of the long-term absence from a school perspective could have an impact, and maybe that's something we could take away and look at. So, for instance, if that absence ceases during a summer holiday period, if we've got the timeliness of reporting of that coming through, and I'll take that back and have a look at that and come back to you if that's helpful.
Yeah, yeah, thank you very much, Tracy. I'm just taking a look at the statistics, and the cases or incidents of absences tend to go down by somewhat like half or even more So 600 to less than 300. So 600 in July and 300 in August. So a number of missed days tends to fall by less than that. Perhaps a third or even less in the case of last year. Sorry, I'm just looking at a second screen to be able to see the statistics. So just another point to note in terms of the other indicators, in terms of incidence of sickness, if 1 out of 6 of the days are missed, in terms of our other absences, it doesn't help us in terms of the analysis of the data and capturing data to resolve any issues arising out of this. So as with others, I welcome the decision to review this. Perhaps they may have been mentioned earlier in terms of the NHS and what they use. Would there be a purpose to go to the WLGA and ask for consistency across local authority and local authorities in Wales or public sector in Wales? Because it doesn't make sense for us all to be collecting non-comparable data. And then if you look at the other figures that we have in the figure, in terms of the 22 local authorities and what's happening across Wales, if we're not collecting the same data, and then we're not analysing in the same way, that could lead to it being somewhat misleading. So I don't know if it would help us to collect data separately locally rather than having one set of data across Wales for the indicators.
Thanks, Councillor Johnson. Yeah, in terms of the data and the data set for August, it will be impacted because schools make up a considerable number of our workforce. And if we're not reporting short-term absence for that time, then that will equate to the difference. In terms of us all using a common set of descriptors, of course, that's something we can take back. But we have been attempting to collect standard category data from the other 22 local authorities, and we are starting to use more broader descriptors, but in terms of all of us as local authorities, but they're not consistent. I think we'd need to get agreement on a WLGA or all local authority level that we were going to look to do that, and that's something I can certainly take back to the WLGA to see if that's something that all 22 local authorities will do.
Something for us to certainly consider as a committee in terms of what this looks like in terms of the bus data. Anyway, I think. Thanks, Tracy.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. And yes, that certainly can be a recommendation of ours. Alignment with the NHS categories and across all LAs makes absolute sense. Councillor Lovelock-Edwards, please ask your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Tracy. Just following on from Councillor Johnson's comment, I sort of agree in terms of that consistency of approach. That's, would be something for this committee. I'd be keen for us to take forward. I just want to make a couple of points, and that is following on from Councillor Carroll's comments around stress. And that I think we need to bear in mind that we shouldn't be spending so much time, energy and limited resources on trying to get the finite and sort of minutiae of stress in terms of work-related, non-work-related. I'd rather that the officers and the staff focus the limited resources on understanding what the stresses are in the workplace, how we can alleviate them, and what we can do to help people sort of improve their health and maintain good mental health. That, to me, is critical. The question I wanted to ask in terms of the musculoskeletal, because it seems that to me, if I've read this correctly, has a higher percentage of linked absences than stress, either work or non-work related. So I just wanted to know, is there a correlation, or has there been any work done in terms of that particular absence and the age profile, taking into consideration that we're an ageing society and the Vale in particular as an ageing population? And obviously, as the champion for older people, I'm always aware of sort of how we age and age-friendly status that we've achieved, and about ageing well is not just clearly for our residents, but also for our colleagues and the staff too. And secondly, is there capacity, or is there already in place a system where those with specific musculoskeletal absences are referred not just to a general OC health practitioner, but to a sort of OC health physio, so they can work with that individual on that specific nature of absence, because it's quite a distinct absence compared to the other descriptors. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll take a couple of points, if that's okay, in turn. So just in terms of stress and our management of stress, we're absolutely concerned with making sure that we support an individual when they're declaring stress-related absence, whether it be work-related or non-work related. And our occupational health teams work quite strongly with our line managers and our business partners to look at the reasons behind those stresses and how we can appropriately and best support them. That has seen an increase in utilisation of counselling support across the organisation in most recent years, and we envisage an upward trend in that, and we're looking at how we can balance that increasing cost with the need of supporting our staff from a wellbeing perspective. So with that in mind, our health safety and wellbeing team have been doing quite a bit of work in this area to look at both trying to minimise the incidence of stress at work, particularly from a stress at work perspective, but also not discluding stress non-work related. And they've been working across the organisation currently in terms of undertaking wellbeing action plans and stress risk assessments. So that's something that we've been doing, or more actively doing, across the last sort of 6 months to 12 months. And we're looking at what trends we may get from that moving forward. In terms of musculoskeletal, I couldn't say hand on heart currently. We haven't run the report to look at whether that is more prevalent from an age perspective. When I've done that in the past, but not within this local authority, that has been the case. But we can certainly look at running that statistical data from a local authority perspective. It can also be the case in more manual related roles that we've got higher incidence, but we can certainly take that away and look at it. And then the third point in relation to occupational health and referrals to physio, unfortunately at this present point, that's not something that we offer. So we tend to work with our occupational health teams, will work with the individual in terms of the GP support that they're being offered and ensuring that they're being signposted to the relevant physio support. At this current point of time, we don't make referrals to physio related support, and that's not something that we've been funding.
Thank you, Tracy. Did you want to come back in on any of those points, Councillor Lovelock-Edwards?
If you don't mind, Chair, thank you, Tracy. That was really useful. If there is capacity, because I've already made the point about time, energy, and resources, that you can look at sort of the if there is any correlation, that would be useful. I take on board and accept the point around manual handling and manual intense work is likely to sort of give rise to those absences. But I would be interested to see if there is any scope for going forward, any perhaps review to see if targeted support, because I know that with the NHS and waiting list, we, sort of some members may be awaiting a longer period of time for physio support, that if there's something that we can offer further down the line. And I appreciate that, later on in tonight's meeting, we're going to have discussions around resources, funding, and where we are critically. But if that could be looked at, that would, I'd welcome that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Councillor Carroll, you've had one go, so shall we ask Councillor Wood to come in first, and then you can have your second question, if that's okay, because he hasn't had to go yet. Councillor Wood, do you want to jump the queue? There we go.
That's all right. Thank you, Chair. I mean, we've been looking at these numbers now for 2 or 3 years, and they're fairly little bit up, little bit down. Different directorates, a little bit up, little bit down. I think considering where we are in terms of output in the council and trying to find as many efficiencies as possible, that this really deserves a proper working task group to really come up with hard solutions, because we're seeing stress in a very generic measurement, non-work related. So it's stress outside work contributing enormously to the figures of people missing work. And I feel very sorry for the people who are going through this, but we really do need solutions. We've tried a different health provider. We're trying this, we're trying that, and we don't really seem to be making much impact. And it's a very large number. Okay, we're at the Welsh average, but that's nothing to be necessarily proud of. And I think when I hear that we're going to consider the cost of implementing more effort or more plans versus actually getting employees of the council healthy and back to work, the cost is really not something that we should be considering, because we have these people on within the council, and we really do need to get these numbers moving in the right direction in the short to medium term. So I know that's not necessarily a question, but I don't know where we go from here. We've been looking at these for 2 or 3 years now, and we really aren't making it significant progress, I don't believe.
Tracy, would you like to?
Would you like me to come in? I very much respect the points that have just been made there, and I understand that this is really difficult and it's a real challenge to us. We are doing a more broader review. We will have and have got actually a task group that looking at reviewing absence management processes moving forward from the early part of the new year. We're hoping that we can take in some statistical information from the trial review that we're undertaking from our occupational health service department currently. It is a really difficult one to crack, and it's not coming without effort being made on the part of our health, safety and wellbeing team and occupational health team to try to reduce absence and the incidence of it. We're trying to come at it from a two-pronged attack. One, looking to reduce the incidence of absence occurring through the wellbeing action plans and the stress risk assessments. Also by looking at supporting individuals from an ergonomic perspective in terms of either working from home to make sure that they've got the proper setup from a home working perspective, but also looking at those manual handling and interventions that we can make to best support those individuals that are operating on the front line. We're also then looking at reviewing absence when it does occur, and this is what the trial is looking at, as to whether we can minimise the duration of absence by changing our phased return approach to bring people back to work perhaps earlier, but having a longer phase to return for staff, and whether that will be helpful in terms of minimising statistics. And one thing I will say is that our reasons for absence, although more broadly have been around stress and stress at work, we've also kind of ridden a bit of a wave around viral infection, particularly post-pandemic. and we're seeing some evidence of that reducing. I mean, if anybody has got any useful information that they can share with us in terms of what other organisations may be doing to impact their sickness trends analysis, I'd be really welcome to hear it. We do have regular discussions with our other 22 local authorities. Nobody's come forward yet on something that's particularly maverick or is having a significant impact on reducing their absence, and I'm also reviewing what's happening from a more broader commercial perspective. And again, most organisations that I've been liaising with aren't seeing a fundamental shift in terms of their absence, which I suppose is indicative of the Welsh average that indicators. It's something that I am really passionate about. I'd love to see a change in terms of the landscape on absence, but it's not been one that we've been able to crack so far.
Thank you, Tracy. Councillor Wood, do you want to come back in on anything that Tracy said there? I don't know if we've got Councillor Wood. Afraid we can't hear you.
I don't deny that it's a complicated nut to crack. I'm not saying that it isn't, but we are above the lowest council in the country. There are lots in the middle, and I think we do need to really focus on this and really give it a lot of effort, because this is the simplest way of all for the council to be able to provide its more services, and as well as it can, is that the people that it has in its employ, it takes as good a care of them as it possibly can, and allows these people to get back to work. I don't deny that it's a complicated issue, and I support every effort we can put towards it.
Thank you, Councillor Wood. Councillor Carroll, come back in, please.
Yeah, I was going to just touch on what Councillor Lovelock Edwards said, but my comments will follow on quite nicely from Councillor Wood's contribution as well, Chair. Councillor Lovelock Edwards made the point about not getting into the minutiae because we should focus resources on supporting getting people back into work and providing them with that support. At least I think that's the point she was making. I agree with that. The point I would make is we really do need to understand exactly what it is that's keeping people out of work and is putting them among these sickness absence records. So that's why I was pushing for more clarity in the data. I think what Councillor Wood says is absolutely right. I don't think this is a problem that just affects this authority. I mean, if we look at the public sector and indeed the private sector across Wales and across Britain, there is an issue with the numbers of people on sickness absence, and that's why the government has been pushing on this. It's really to touch on what Councillor Wood said regarding work to help get people back into work. I note Tracy's contribution, but given that the UK government has been pushing on this, and I would hope the Welsh government has been doing likewise, has there been any steer or guidance from either the Welsh or the UK government on getting people back into work and out of these sickness absence figures provided to the authority? Because I'm conscious that the more staff we have on sickness absence and not in work is going to add to the productivity crisis that the public sector is facing. So it would be interesting to know what help and support the authority is getting from central government on this, and whether we need to be making an approach as an authority for more help and guidance to address what I think we all accept is a problem.
Thank you, Councillor Carroll. Tracy, do you want to come back in on that? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Prothero. Yeah, more than happy to. Thank you, Councillor Carroll. I'm not aware of any particular directives that are coming forward yet. should there be or should there be something I'm not aware of, I'm happy to be guided or directed. As I say, we do continue to ensure that we're kept up to speed with whatever the NHS are offering, whatever sort of themes or projects that they're undertaking, and so do our occupational health teams. So if there is anything that we're missing, more than happy to be directed, but there's no particular directive that I can see that's coming out currently that we're not undertaking. And if that directive came to us, of course, we would look at it. From a task and finish approach, as I've said, that is something that we are looking to do from the early part of next year. We've already got a task and finish group that's set up. They've put this trial in place, and I'd be happy to come back to this group on the next occasion to just inform of the progress of that, and what actions may have come from those task force groups.
Thank you, Tracy. And committee would definitely welcome feedback from your groups, and in your opening summary as well, the results of the trial that you've been undertaking. We really want to see things turn a corner for all of us, but we do appreciate this is not just this council, it's endemic. Do we have any other questions from any other members? No? Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, Tracy, for the presentation and for fielding all of our questions. And we do appreciate the passion that you put into this work. We really do. If we then, committee, move into recommendations, I think we do have a number that we would like to put forward to Cabinet, and also as suggested by your good self, Tracy. So first recommendation, if that's okay, Karen, will be that the results of the trial will be fed back to us. I don't know, it's in 6 months too soon for you, Tracy, or will you have a report that you can share with us in 6 months from that?
Yeah, of course, that's no problem.
That's brilliant. Also, we would like as well again, if it could come at the same point, that would be good. Some stats on the effectiveness of the Westfield service. I know Councillor Hanks and all of us will be keen to see how that's working, if that's possible. The third recommendation, sorry, Karen, would be the suggestion, which I support, from Councillor Johnson, on work that we can do looking at the alignment of our descriptors with the NHS, and to see if the WGLA would be interested in supporting that piece of work so that we will be consistent in our reporting across all local authorities. It would make so much more sense then, but if that is a piece of work as well that we could recommend putting forward, please. Also, the statistical data and age-related musculoskeletal, I think that might be a piece of work that will be worth looking at. And again, we know money isn't in plentiful supply, but if we could look at the costings to have that option of physio where it is appropriate as another measure of helping people who are off work because of musculoskeletal problems and are waiting to have treatment, which is preventing them from coming back to work. It's just if we can recommend that is something that we look at as a costing, I think that would be really, really good. And as you've already said, we want to see what the task and finish group is working on as well when that's available for us. That's quite a lot of recommendations, and I do apologise, but committee had lots of ideas tonight. So can I have a hand to move on those, please, from a committee member? Thank you, Councillor Lovelock-Edwards. And seconder, thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. Marvellous. Let's swiftly move on then to agenda item.
Sherry, sorry to interrupt you, but can I, it's nothing to do with that agenda item, and before we move on to the next one, it was a bit remiss of me not to have mentioned, I did have a conversation with Councillor Franks a couple of days ago regarding the minute in relation to his declaration of interest. His
Yeah.
declaration referred to him being a trustee of Seal Park, and he's actually
Yes.
advised me he's a member of the Friends of Seal Park. So with the committee's
Okay.
permission and with Councillor Franks's permission, if you're happy, I can amend, reflect in our minutes tonight, subject to that change. Councillor Franks?
Absolutely.
Thank you. We did indeed have a chat. It's only a small detail,
Okay.
and we both of us promised one another that at least one of us would remember at today's meeting. So thank you, Karen. I'm very grateful for your memory. Thank you, Chair.
That's great. Yeah, no problem there at all. So I got through that one, hadn't I? So we're now on agenda item 5. Okay. So this is report of the Director of Corporate Resources. This is Q2 revenue monitoring. Again, that's the period April 24 to September 24. And we've got Matt Bomer with us now to take us through the body of the report. Thank you, Matt.
Evening. For this report and for a couple of the other finance reports on the agenda this evening, I'll give a brief presentation broadly in line with what's in front of you. But colleagues will be aware that we've had a couple of grant announcements, and we're doing further work on a couple of these papers, ready to take them to Cabinet in the new year. So I'll give some minor updates on those when I finish presenting to the substance of the reports in front of you. So revenue monitoring for Q2 first. It's fair to say the monitoring for the period shows a slight deterioration in the year end position compared to what we reported at the end of the first quarter, and that's naturally disappointing. It's in part due to a further increase in the social services overspend in year, and that's across both children's and young people and adults. And also we have a merge in overspend in school transport too. I think it is worth remembering though that we did allocate significant growth to all of these areas in 24/5 budget setting. But the growth and complexity of demand, as well as inflationary pressures, have increased well in excess of the additional budget that we were able to award. And then naturally, these are areas, and you've seen this already, that are of particular focus in our 25/6 budget setting, and also highlighted in the Council's reshaping programme as priority areas as well. One of the things we have committed to provide, and this partly addresses some of the recommendations in the Audit Wealth Financial Sustainability Report, is that we're starting to include some data points illustrating some of the growth in demand in the appendices to the report. So a little bit more information, more on the performance side as well. In addition to those headline pressures, there's also continuing pressures across highways, maintenance, street cleansing, and ALN. So the unplanned use of resources in the year stands at just over £14 million, and that's after contribution from the projected council tax surplus. In-year council tax collection is getting a lot more closer to the target set in the budget, and more in line with the pre-COVID collection levels. And also we continue to do relatively well with collecting some of the historical arrears as well. Of concern is the schools position. That's in the report still modelled on deficit of circa £4.3 million. However, the current deficits in school that schools are reporting are closer to 10 million. Historically, school deficits have reduced as the financial year progresses. Some of that is because of reporting presentation, but also as additional grant funding comes in, and some of the energy funding that we're about to release to schools, that they all help to mitigate the position. Longer term, and this more into 25/6 and future years, there's a school task force in place looking at longer term efficiencies, as well as the school's finance team working very hard with the school to try and address these deficits. And as part of the 25-6 budget setting, we identified some extra resource that we funded from reserves to support in that work. In the context of that, those additional pressures, there are further measures being put in by the senior leadership team and the administration. So the use of all reserves now are being considered by the senior leadership team. There's further recruitment controls in place, which is fairly equivalent to recruitment freeze, but all posts come into SLT for recruitment to progress. There's further examination of the use of grant expenditure, and that's been undertaken by the accountancy team. And in addition, we've got some specific work streams that were identified as part of the reshaping programme around demand management in adults and school transport arrangements, and that work's being accelerated. Obviously, we had quite a savings target in the current financial year. We're currently delivering 70% of that. There is a gap, and that's contributing to the overall pressures, and that's being met from the budget risk reserve that we set aside when we set in the budget. There is on some more positive news. There's additional grant funding available for homelessness and housing pressures in year, and that's enabled us to reduce the drawdown from that reserve in year. The rapid rehousing programme is taking good effect, and it's considered that reserve use can probably be stepped down a bit in 25-6 too. The unplanned use of reserves alongside the other commitments, you're seeing that as a consequence of that, reserves are projected to reduce to £50 million at year end. That has at the moment identified some reduction in the council fund, but we have a review of the reserves underway as part of budget setting, and we will leave the council fund fully intact at year end. So that's the substance of the report in front of you this evening. We are publishing a Q2 supplemental monitoring report, which will likely be published in the morning now or later today if it's not already been published, to go in front of Cabinet tomorrow. We've had, as part of the £1.7 billion of consequentials from the Chancellor's budget announcement at the end of October, you'll recall that that those consequentials effectively covered 2 financial years, 24-5 and 25-6. So the £774 million for Wales in 24-5, we started to see that being allocated out a few weeks ago. The councils had about £6.1 million. That's funding the revaluation of the teachers' pensions and supports the additional employers' costs there. This money to top up the teachers' pay award and also the NJC pay award. So there's going to be an update as a supplemental report on those allocations being in front of Cabinet tomorrow. That's all I was going to say in introduction to this report on the agenda this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Matt. I can see Councillor Franks has put his hand up while you were speaking, so I'm going to hand over to him for his questions straight away. Thank you, Councillor Franks. Thank you,
Chair and Matt. This is quite a detailed report, and I don't complain about that. I like this type of detail, though it is a little bit overwhelming. But as I say, it's good to have this detail. But what I find that sticks out is the unplanned use of resources. It is really staggering. Now, I understand there are cost pressures. We all know that. But in all honesty, Cabinet should have been aware of these pressures during the budget process. These aren't new pressures. These have been around for quite some time. It does tempt me to ask, what is the point of having a budget consultation exercise and even a debate in council when the figures are so wildly out? They are enormous sums, and to my mind, really do call into question the ability of Cabinet to manage the resources of the council. We always seem to have a range of consultations when we invite members of the public to comment. But when the budget is so wildly out, what is the point of asking the public when they're not being given the accurate information? I know Matt would, as director, will be able to answer some of the technical questions, but I'd really welcome comment from a Cabinet member explaining why and how they get their figures so wrong. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Franks. So, Matt, really looking at the question of unplanned reserves and the use of it, and I suppose a definition of unplanned and how these increases occur. I don't know if you'd be able to give any insight into that. It's a difficult one.
So I just realised I put my microphone back off. We've in budget setting, we've attempted to put realistic budgets in place, and we've done that on the best information that we had at the time, back in February, early in the year. They are the numbers in social care, both children's and adults, are really significant, but you'll see from the body of the report some of those increases in demand and the complexity have been quite extraordinary and not typical of previous years and very difficult to forecast. Obviously, a large element of the unplanned use reserves is the drawdown of school balances, and certainly the £10 million that schools are forecasting at the moment is way in excess of the levels of efficiencies that we built into schools' budgets when we were setting them earlier in the year. So I'm expecting certainly an upturn in those numbers, especially on the back of the fact that we've now received £3.3 million for teachers' pensions, in excess of £1 million for teachers' pay, and also best part of £1 million to cover NJC pay scales in schools as well. So that will make that will have a positive impact, but they're not numbers I'm comfortable with, and numbers that I'd be wanting to report to you this evening. But they are numbers that have emerged during the first quarter of the year. They haven't grown significantly since that time, but they're still of some concern to me.
Thank you, Matt. And I appreciate that in education we've now got in place a task force, haven't we, looking at the spend. You've also procured a procurement specialist in a centralised function to help schools when they're looking at economies of scale with what they buy in their contracts. And I'm sure those measures will help. With social services, I understand what you're saying. It's almost unpredictable, the number of cases you're going to get and the complexities of the case, which is what the cost is and where you can see that increase. Do we, and this is just a question for me, so with social services, is most of it an outsourced type of function? Is it third-party providers, or do we deliver a lot of that in-house? Is there a way of being able to look at that spend to see if and where those increases are falling, or is it just simply not that simple?
There's a mixture of provision in social care. There's a fair amount of it that is externally commissioned, And that's certainly one of the challenges that the team have during budget setting, is actually negotiating those fees with the external providers, and that's been particularly tough given the levels of inflation that persisted throughout last financial year into budget setting. There was probably some expectation that some of those pressures would start easing, and they've not done so perhaps as much as expected. A lot of the residential care, domiciliary care are predominantly externally sourced, although the council does have some of its own residential provision, and that certainly allows us to do some benchmarking of the sort of fee increases that we expect from the private sector. Similar to the case with children's social care, but where we aren't able to place children within county provision or within the county bounds, some of the external provision is extraordinarily expensive.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Franks, you're still with us, so would you like to come back in?
Yes,
Sorry.
please. Thank you for that. And I checked, it doesn't look as though we've got a cabinet member to comment, which is disappointing. But if I could go now to the smaller items, although still substantial. On page 29, there's reference to risks, and there seems to be an awful lot of savings that are red flagged. In other words, I take it means it's unlikely to happen, or it's going to be a major challenge, and an awful lot of amber that are going to be a struggle. Things like green flag status removal, Jenner Park alternative model, parking charging review. And then if I go to page 34, forgive me because I'm looking at another screen, we've got a review of the docks office, it's £100,000. And where is it? Oh, the digital services, £80,000. You know, when you add all these things up, that's quite a challenge and quite a financial risk. So can we have a comment on those type of items, please, Chair?
Yeah, I did give them some broad coverage in the introduction, and the fallout from those reds and ambers at the moment is that there's only 70% of the savings programmes been delivered. We are reviewing them all on a regular basis, and while some of them won't be deliverable in full or part this year, we've been reviewing the extent to which they can stay in the base budget and are deliverable over the longer term, and a number of them are. Docks office is a good example of that. That was very dependent on the levelling up bid. We've now had confirmation of that funding staying in place after the Chancellor's budget. The memorandum of understanding is signed on both parties, MHCLG and the council. So expect that to be delivered in the new financial year. There are a number then, as you highlighted earlier in the report on page 29, that are predominantly in environment and housing directorate. It's certainly the case that there have been a large number of small items, and that does challenge capacity in terms of their delivery. They're still all being progressed and taken forward, but the pace in delivering those has been the real challenge.
Thank you, Matt. Councillor Franks, you're back? No, he's not. Councillor Johnson, would you like to ask your question next? Thank you.
Thank you. Just building upon some of those points, this is obviously a report at the end of Q2, at the end of September, and we're now a fortnight away from the end of Q3. And so, obviously, a number of things will have changed in the meantime in terms of what Matt was talked about, grants coming through, and perhaps the situation in relation to schools perhaps may be different by the end of the year. If other grants are on the horizon, there is a bit of a concern, because we did speak about last year the number of schools which were in a deficit position and setting a deficit budget. The numbers in this report, the report that we've read, with extra information from Matt suggesting that this is now 37 schools, or 70% of schools, of the schools in the Vale. And it's difficult for us as councillors to be able to understand the situation in schools, because with cuts or budgetary changes from the council, we can ask questions and challenge, but we don't have the same line of sight to do this with school budgets. We only know the situation, but we don't know this is leading to loss of staff, which types of impacts this will be having. So we know the overview of school budgetary position, but we can't see the impacts. So this is a bit of a concern for me, generally speaking, because of the devolved nature of those budgets. But of course, this is a lot of money in the report before us. The second point relates to social care. And we need to look at this through the prism of adult social care and corporate landlord social care. Increasing pressures from the chair of the Committee for Social Care. The increasing pressures have been around since forever. I remember the cabinet falling in 2006 because of problems with social care. That's how long-standing the challenge is. We do know there are a number of people in the Vale, older people, are increasing, and it's been on the increase at quite a bit of pace over the last decade, and it will continue to increase. So in spite of the fact that we don't know how many children will be in care, and this would vary, I am concerned about the fact that we're still not sure, or we can't predict the impact of the increasingly elderly population that we have. I don't want this committee to reinvent the wheel in terms of the work of other committees. So I'm asking this as a question to the chair more than anything, but is it something that it would be worth to have with Lance Carver, head of that department, or Liz Jones from education, coming to us to speak about the challenges that they have in this regard? And not just Matt, with every due respect to Matt, of course, but would it be worth to hear from those directors and experts to come to this committee to explain in more depth, perhaps some sort of presentation or through another mechanism for us to have a better understanding of all of this and to ask the questions in the types of depth and detail that we'd like to do so? I understand that this isn't necessarily a question but a comment, but there's one point to Matt, the point that Councillor Matt Hanks made in relation to savings. The savings in this report, they have the RAG rating and the size of the savings that we want to make and that we expect to make. Sometimes there's a relationship between the RAG rating and what we expect to save, but sometimes there's not quite a relationship there, and I'm not sure whether this is referred to somewhere in the paperwork or whether I'm missing something. For example, because of the example from Councillor Franks, where there's a mention in terms of taking away green flag status from parks. It refers to 140,000 in savings and 140,000 savings that we would expect, but it nonetheless is red. Now, there are a number of others where there's not quite a read across between the respective columns. So just raising a question whether I'm misunderstanding or if there's been a mistake in some way in the paper. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Matt, do you want to come back in on some of the points that Councillor Johnson's raised there?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So the school, I'm getting an echo at me. The schools, I'm just getting an echo. Can I just see if that's going to deal?
We didn't hear an echo when you spoke then. It might just be you're hearing
I'm
it.
getting one.
It's not easy, I know.
Yeah.
But we can hear you loud and clear.
Let me try. I've just tried playing with a couple of settings. I think that might have worked. Thank you. So the just taking those 3 or 4 points in turn, the schools monitoring is a real challenge because of the delegated nature of the school's budget, and they're quite in contrast to the those budgets directly managed by the directors of the council. So we are reliant on the work being done by the school's finance team and the head of strategy and community services, and the work he does with the schools. It is frustrating, and we had this last year, that there was when we had the initial budgets through, there were movements in reserves of £7, £8, £9 million. It progressively eased during the course of the year, and our balances at the 31st of March held up at in the order of £3 million. And we're in that same sort of cycle again this year. I do anticipate the schools balances moving significantly during the year, but it's very difficult to give a really firm number in this report, and that's not a position I particularly want to be in. We do know that schools need to be delivering efficiencies to stay within budget, but to date, the redundancy panel that we have established as part of the process to draw down money from the council's pay risk reserve hasn't had to sit for schools at all up to this point in the year from April. What I don't have then the visibility of is the extent to which there's turnover in teaching and non-teaching staff in schools, and whether the level to which or the extent to which vacancies aren't being filled. So the schools is a real challenging area. Social care, we do. It's part of the reason we started putting some of the performance data and the data in the reports. But certainly the social care team have really good data on the older adults coming through, and the demographic information that we have from census and other sources. I guess the challenge is trying to understand from the growing population the numbers that would end up coming through and requiring care, both residential or domiciliary care from us, the complexities of the needs those older people may have, and also the extra challenge, particularly at this time, is the cost of that provision. So it's a tough area. The Lance, I know, does take the budget extremely seriously. He's got 3 really good heads of service working with him on that, as well as the rest of the wider team. They have a monthly budget programme report board. I've started attending that as well. And I do see firsthand the rigour with which they're approaching the budget and budget monitoring. And as I said in the intro, we have spent a lot of time in the 2025-6 budget setting to make sure that we fully reflect all the costs that are currently in the system and those potentially coming through in 25-6 as well. The RAG rating, those do look a bit odd. I agree with you, Councillor Johnson. What commit to do is go away and certainly for the 3rd quarter, when those numbers come back, we'll make sure that there's 100% read across. Certainly the green flag one does look particularly odd, doesn't it? Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Councillor Johnson. I guess the difficulty that we've got as committee, we know that 70% of our total budget is schools and social services, and we know that there are escalating runaway costs, some of which we can explain by, the complexity and the additional requirements of our residents. But what we don't know, I guess, and we can't see this, is that the services that we are spending money on, are we getting best value out of that? We can't see that, can we? And we know that no matter what happens, we will find money to support our residents who need us. But it's kind of underneath that, it's getting underneath that data. This is how much we're spending, but do we know that we're spending money on this service in an effective way? I hope that's not a criticism at all in any way, but it's just that's the bit we can't see. And I'm wondering if, as you said, Lance is particularly focused on his budget, if there is some of that information that he has, so that he understands, what he's spending, and that in these areas he's getting, the best value he can with what he's buying or what he's commissioning. Maybe that's the sort of report that would be appropriate for this committee, not the operational stuff, the sort of thing Councillor Johnson is interested in. I am too, but maybe that would sit with another committee. But the figures underneath it, that's probably appropriate for us. So I'd be more than happy to see some more of the work that his budget group is doing. And if committee also are interested, I think it might help us certainly to understand a little bit more about why we've got such prices and costs going up through the roof, because there won't just be one reason, and I know that, but yeah, so that would be helpful.
I'm sure Lance would be comfortable providing some of that, and certainly during what we've done at the outset of budget setting the last couple of years, we've had a very extensive piece of benchmarking that we've put in front of the senior leadership team. Goes down a couple of levels below directorate, and on the whole, and this fits with the general position of council being a low spending authority, we are low spending at a service level against all of our Welsh comparators. We're typically in the lowest quartile. I do know Lance and team look at specific social care benchmarking, and Lance does benefit from his head of adult services in particular, who'd previously worked in Pembrokeshire, being well connected in terms of Welsh Government and the wider social care network, and also the head of resource management also being having joined us from another county and having wider experience as well. So that experience and that benchmarking is available, and I'm sure that's something worth exploring with the director.
I think that would be welcome, and it's such a big area of spend for us, and as I said, with lots of pressures. So I think that would be really helpful. I can't see any other hands, but I've just got one more question, if I may. So we know from the savings position, directorates are tasked with finding savings, and then they come back and it's the level of the savings, and then they agree what it is that they're going to be working on. And a lot of the time we're talking about reviewing of services and that kind of thing. Now, I can see from that report there is only one example where we've targeted savings at a procurement exercise and the retendering of a contract, and that was the managed print service. And this, to me, I can't really see why we don't do more of that, because every time we renew a contract, every time we look at that, we've got an opportunity to change slightly a specification, look at what is it that we need rather than what we want, and also put a saving target on it. And I'm curious as to why we don't try and use that approach with the millions and millions of pounds that we're spending all the time. I don't know how you feel about that, Matt, but it certainly feels to me as if there should be a lot more of that going on, because every time we have a competition, there's an opportunity to do something at a lower cost. But please come back. Tell us what you think.
No, I agree with you, and that's where we've been attempting to get ourselves to with our procurement service. Colleagues probably recall I've talked about actually pulling our contract register together, which wasn't in very good order. That's been done, and there's been a forward plan developed off the front of that, and that's going round to heads of service just to validate to make sure we've got no gaps, and then that'll come to the strategic insight board on a quarterly basis, so that we can actually put some challenging around procurement taking place for the very reasons you've just outlined.
Yeah, great. And there is absolutely no way with also, or no reason why you can't look at an approach where you include in your tender documents and you disclose the budget that you have. Because if that's your budget and that's all the money you have, it helps also bidders to see, well, we can't go above that. So it's not necessarily an anti-competitive way of doing things, but we really don't have any more money. So I'd like to see us try different approaches, because none of this is going to change unless we do something different, quite frankly. So there'll be recommendations, and I hope the committee will agree. Councillor Lovelock-Edwards, you've got your hand up. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. And you've actually sort of taken the words out of my mouth. It's about, we're going to have to start looking at doing things differently. And that what's already been recommended by yourself and Councillor Johnson, it seems a sort of a step in the right direction. And Matt, I welcome the update in regards to procurement, because linking into the scrutiny then in terms of digging down via sort of Lance Carver and his team, I would welcome something similar in education. Oh. Someone's pet doesn't agree with me.
Those are mine, unfortunately.
That's okay. It doesn't put me off in the slightest. I've had worse in the background heckling me. I just think that because they are two key biggest sort of areas of spend, and because following on from Councillor Johnson's point about sort of that oversight, I know that there are 37 schools, I think mostly at primary level, that are in a deficit. And I would actually argue that perhaps what we need to do is have better scrutiny within the governing bodies. Because, head teachers go into the profession to teach. They know, they may have business acumen, but we can't, they're making difficult decisions. Perhaps, they may, the governing bodies that sit alongside them and not being the critical friends that perhaps they need to be. So I'd want to see some further scrutiny on the role of governing bodies there. And I don't know if that's in the gift of this this committee, and certainly, obviously, in the Education and Learning Scrutiny Committee. But if we could perhaps have some further information from the Director of Education, I would welcome that information. So deficit means so much to so many different people, and I think we need to understand how the school reached that position without criticising or challenging, but to learn lessons. That's critical, and to, as Councillor Prothero has said, to look at possibly doing things differently. And I've made the point, and I think we've had the discussion previously, and linked into Councillor Prothero's point about procurement and best value. If there's capacity to take things back in house, where it works better, more effectively, and we know what level service agreements we're getting, then that I think that's something that we have to look more in detail at in going forward, and perhaps using that as the catalyst for doing things differently. Sorry, and amongst there might have been a question, Matt. Thank you.
Yeah. Certainly a couple of things, I guess. One is the relationship between the head teacher and the governing body, and ultimately the setting the budget at a school level is the responsibility of the governing body. But it's a difficult role for them to be the real critical friend, using your terminology, they need to be when they're up against an expert school teacher. So I head teacher. So I guess there's an issue there around making sure that we have properly trained governing bodies. And then on the procurement issue, just on it specifically to schools, within the task force that I mentioned earlier that's in place, there's 3 main streams of work at the moment. The first is around procurement, and a lot of work has been done to identify, the plethora of individual school level contracts that are in place, and looking at the opportunities to have cluster-led or county-wide school contracts in place, because there's quite a variation in how much schools are paying for some of these contracts. The second stream is about agency work costs in schools and similar collaboration needed. And then there's a broader one about how schools support teaching of ALN in schools. And for those, we've applied some reserves to get some procurement and head teacher support and advice in.
Thank you, Matt. I think it will be quite helpful for this committee to receive a report from that task group as well. It sounds like they're heading in the right direction, and it will be. I think we'd certainly feel assured to see exactly what they've been working on, as you've just described. That would be really good. I'm not sure whether a recommendation should come from this committee to Cabinet to commission a piece of work to work with governors of schools. I'm not sure whether that should be something for Learning and Skills to do. It's I don't know if we're slightly going into another committee's work. I think Councillor Johnson's either going to agree with me or disagree. I'm not sure.
I was going to broadly agree with you. I think there's always a challenge between understanding what our job is as an oversight and our. I don't know if Democratic Services want to suggest a solution by which we might wish to send something sidewards to that committee, or alternatively, we could maybe request a report or have some sort of dialogue. I don't know if Democratic Services have any thoughts on that.
Yes, Chair, that's perfectly permissible to forward some of your comments on to the Learning and Culture Committee. and ask them to consider it. You know, it's a matter for them to consider. So that's not an issue without, and also there's also members have got the request for consideration approach as well. So if they wish themselves, they could put a request for consideration in to that committee anyway, even though you're not a member of that committee. There's always that avenue. But if you feel as a committee that you should be suggesting that, then there's no reason why you can't recommend that. And it's a matter for them then to consider.
I mean, it's Councillor Lovelock-Edwards' suggestion, so I defer back to her on how she feels will be the best way of dealing with this with schools. What do you think?
I agree that I don't want lines to be so blurred that we then go beyond our remit. So I wouldn't want to put anyone in that position, and certainly not myself as a member of this committee. So I'm happy with that suggestion. And as you quite rightly say, Karen, there's another avenue that I could explore as an individual councillor, or we could as a group in terms of the consideration route. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you for that. So we'll just stick with the report from the task group, I think, from education. That would be really helpful for us. Do we have anybody else with any other questions on this particular report? No? Okay. That's brilliant. Well, we do have some recommendations then, as we've just said. So that report would be really welcome from Lance Carver. And showing us a little bit more detail on the figures behind the stats and behind the budget. As you described, I think we would really welcome that, Matt, if that's possible. And similar also offering from the Director of Education and their task group, if that's possible. That would be really good. And then the third recommendation was to do with our approach to having savings from our renewed contracts and our procurement, and actually having savings targets going forward from that. That's 3 recommendations, if everybody's happy with those. I'll have a hand to move. Thank you, Councillor Hanks. And a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. Are you okay with that, Matt? You're looking a bit perplexed.
No, can I just be clear? So from Lance, we're expecting some benchmarking data.
Yes.
And what form do you want that in? Do you want a paper outside of the meeting to be shared?
Could we have it at maybe our next meeting? Can we discuss it in public? Is that okay?
Yeah.
I think so.
Just so it's clear. And then similar from Liz, just a paper on the work that the task.
Yeah, that their group's doing. Yeah. And I know there's probably more in that because, as you've said, they've got different work streams and there's quite a lot going on. But I think that would be really, really helpful.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
And then just that recommendation that we start setting savings targets with our contracts and look at our specifications particularly, so that we don't over specify for things and that we just get what we need rather than, I say bells and whistles, but the other things that maybe don't necessarily need to help us. And make sure everything's competed. I don't need to say that though, do I? Thank you. Okay then, so we've moved on to the next report, which is the capital monitoring report for the period April 24 to September 24. This notes the current approved programme, which I think is £137.168 million. And Matt, I think you've got some more information to share with us on that too, haven't you? And you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Yes, just a brief introduction, a slightly briefer introduction to this one. Hopefully more straightforward report than the revenue one. Covers the same period though, up to the end of September. So the half-year reporting. As you've just said, at the time of writing the report, the programme totaled up just over £137 million. And certainly that's well in excess of any capital programme that's been delivered in the last few years. That budget does include budgets slipped from 23-4 into 24-5, about £15 million. However, if all the requests in the report to amend the capital programme approved, the revised forecast outturn is projected to be £90 million. We've had spend to the end of the first half year of about £25 million. Appendix 1 details the financial progress on all the schemes to the 30th of September. It's important to note, and we keep saying this, don't we, that many areas continue to experience an increase in costs associated with the delivery of schemes, even though it appears that the general inflation in the economy is easing back. Tenders are being received over the current allocated budgets, and officers are reporting a requirement to renegotiate submitted tenders. Schemes are being closely monitored throughout the year to identify overspends, and slippage of 45 or just short of £46 million has been requested in this quarter's monitoring. We're continuing to work with project managers and sponsors to ensure value for money, that all possible funding opportunities are identified. The report does detail quite a number of delegated authority requests that have been approved, and notes the use of emergency powers, which are also detailed in Appendix 1 to the report. Couple of schemes in particular to mention and highlight, I guess. Firstly, St Joseph's RC Primary. There's been a PV panel scheme under the decarbonisation line in the programme, and panels have been installed back in August. That reduces the site's bills and carbon footprint. And secondly, Sports Wales grant funding has been received to deliver 3 schemes across a couple of sites. So there's no new flooring laid at Calcott Sports Centre and Clantwick Major Leisure Centre, and an air handling pump at Clantwick Leisure Centre too. The report requests to make several amendments to the current capital programme, and there's 2 or 3 particularly large amendments. The first is the reprofiling of the Ysgol Iolo Morgannwg and St Richard Gwyn redevelopments in 24 in the future year programme. There's the carry forward of £7.2 million, the housing improvement programme, into the 25-6 capital programme. And there's also the reprofiling of the non-treasury investment strategy into future years of the capital programme. So those are just a couple of highlights by way of introduction, Chair.
Thank you, Matt. Councillor Goodjohn, your hand's shot up, so would you like to ask your question? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Matt, I have to ask about St Richard Gwyn, if you have any additional information on it, because the reason given in the documents is that there's a new procurement framework for the building of schools. And because of that changeover, we have to wait an additional, 2 to 3 years for the building of the new building. Is there any additional reasons why? Have you got any more information to give us as to why we should wait an additional 2 to 3 years?
I've got. I wasn't aware that the total delays of that length. I don't have any more information in front of me this evening than's actually in the report. But certainly, I can talk to the schools team, sustainable learning, community learning team, and ask them to give you a bit more information on that.
Would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. Councillor Johnson, please come in with your questions.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to confirm some figures. So the expectation was to spend 137 million in the current year, and we now expect to spend almost 91 million, with 46 million slipping into the following year. I just wanted to confirm this because obviously that spending, as Matt indicated, includes the reprofiling for Richard Gwyn and Iolo Morgannwg, and of course the work on Ysgol Derry has also been paused. So I'm not sure, because if there's a big scheme and there's delays, of course, this can be a significant change to the plan. But what is the reason behind the underspend on matters within our control in terms of our housing estate, for example? What is the rationale behind this? And could you, Councillor Goodjohn asked, what's new about the procurement framework which has impacted so much upon the new Ysgol Richard Gwyn School? And essentially, what's the core purpose of the procurement, of the new procurement framework, if it's going to delay development of schools, which is difficult in relation to increasing pressures? Is the new framework in relation to the new pressures and funding for schools, or what is the rationale? Thank you.
So, so I've just taken it back off. It's the translation that's throwing me and giving me
Right.
I know to turn it off now. So the when you have such large schemes as these school pipeline schemes and the schemes in the main learning skills programme, the moment there is some rescheduling of those schemes, it does have a really significant impact on the programme and the level of slippage that we're seeing. Obviously, as I've just said in respect of Councillor John's question, I don't have the full information in front of me in respect of Richard Gwyn, so I'll need to go away and find out about that and around the need for those new procurement framework and why it's had the impact that it has. And given that that's a question that a couple of you have asked now, I'll do a reply to the whole committee on that one. And then obviously with Ysgol Derry, the profiling of that, we know the reasons for that with the failure of the initial contract, and that's naturally had an impact on the schedule of the programme. Similarly with the housing development programme, there has been a really ambitious programme, and certainly in 23-4 they did particularly well delivering their ambitions, and we did slip some of that programme during 23-4, and then the end of the year actually had to bring some of the spend or the provision back into 23-4 because of the delivery. So the big programmes of work, they're difficult to forecast and schedule, but again, I'll provide you some additional information on which element of that programme are slipping and some of the reasons contributing to that.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I fully appreciate that. It's just when you see from a first look, when you see a set of figures which suggests that a third of at the end of Q2, a third of the total profiled amount is for slippage into following years. I think it automatically sort of makes you ask some questions about it, doesn't it? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Johnson, and thank you, Matt. It is quite a reasonable question, isn't it? Why would the use of a new framework mean that you've got years of a delay? So I think that's, really appreciate a response to all of us on that one. Councillor Drake.
Yeah, this is just a quick query. I drove past the site of Ysgol Derry yesterday. Is the site well secured? Because it's in the middle of nowhere, and they've got, I can see the build has gone up sort of halfway, but I was just concerned about whether the site is secure.
I don't have the most up-to-date information. I do know the previous contractor started having difficulties, went into administration. There was a lot of work done to make sure that the site was secure. So information I have in front of me is that the site has been well secured, and obviously work's underway, bringing the new contractor in as well. If it's, I'm sure it's that is the case. If it's not, I'll get back and let you know. But I'm pretty confident that the site has been very well secured.
Yes, thank you very much for that. I was just a bit concerned about it being, as I said, it's out in the middle of nowhere. And you know what people are, anybody could get on the site and do damage.
Thank you, Councillor Drake. I don't think we have any other hands. So it's just a very quick question. I'm not going to bring back the procurement. Well, it is slightly, but not quite. So I know that we've said that that tenders are being received well over our allocated budgets. So I'm just curious to know, are we trying to do something differently so that we are better and more accurate at estimating the costs, our potential costs? That's one. Oh, you're on mute. Sorry, Matt.
Yeah. So I do know, for example, with my own property team, we do a lot of the work on schools during the summer holidays and other school breaks. That's a really experienced team. They do, for some of the larger contracts, work with cost consultants. So well before going out to contract, they have a good idea about what the schemes would be costing. So they're certainly in the larger schemes. That's a common approach. I think it just highlights how difficult the market is at the moment.
Yeah. And with the lack of a published budget, possibly bidders will put what they think they can pay. Anyway, thank you. Do we have any other questions, please, on this report? No? Okay, that's great. Let's move swiftly then to recommendations then. So the report was generally for noting. So we were noting the progress against the 24-25 capital programme. We were noting the use of delegated authority as set out in the report, the emergency powers as detailed in Appendix 1, and the changes to the 24-25 capital programme and the future years. So that was for noting. And I think other than the reports that we've requested, I don't think there was anything else, was there? That was it? So just the report back to us, please, on the why the framework would delay things by a couple of years, because it does seem a bit extraordinary. Can we have a hand to move then, please, chaps? Thank you very much, Councillor John. And a seconder, please. Thank you, Councillor Lovelock Edwards. Right then, so let's move then on to agenda item 7. We're going back to reference from Cabinet now, and this is the medium-term financial plan, 25-26 to 29-30. This is a refresh of it. And I think we've got Matt again. Sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Fine. So I'm going to do similar to the earlier reports. I'll present basically the content of the report in front of you. Obviously, there's been some announcements last couple of weeks. So I'll just give a little bit of update on the impact of those at the end of the introduction as well. As you know, this report provides an update to the financial position that we've last reported on in July, when we set out our approach to setting the budget for 25-6 and the medium-term financial plan from 2025-6 to 29-30. There have been a number of member briefings in the past couple of weeks, and also there's some sessions in the diary with the political groups as well. There's a couple tomorrow. I think there's one early in the new year as well. I think it's worth remembering the context of our budget setting. Vale Glamorgan is the second lowest funded of all the Welsh counties per capita. And actually in the settlement that we've just had through, that continues to be the case, and the council's also low spending and low taxing as well. as little as I want to move back to the revenue monitoring that we've just been discussing, it's really pertinent to do so here, unfortunately. So in the Q1 revenue monitoring, we reported growing ALN, social care and school transport pressures, along with the challenging financial position in our schools with the prospect of a increasing number of deficits, and in the Q2 report you've just seen that those pressures persist. So naturally we are seeing continued demand pressures, and they're certainly going to continue into next year and certainly across the medium term, and that does provide the council with significant financial challenge over that period. As you actually mentioned yourself, Chair, a little earlier, social care and schools are accounting for an ever-increasing proportion of the council's resources, 68% in 23-4, 70% in the current financial year, 24-5, and certainly we're going to see that creeping up year on year, squeezing the resources available for other council services. These pressures, alongside the constrained growth in funding, we've been modelling a 3.99% increase in council tax and a 1% increase only in the Welsh Government grant in the report in front of you. However, it's anticipated that we do better than the 1%, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. The Chancellor's UK budget on 30th of October was certainly better than expected for the public sector, as Rachel Reeves set out her plans to repair public finances. With the additional funding for health, social care and schools at a UK level, there are £1.7 billion of consequentials for Wales, probably £1 billion more than anticipated. That does span, though, 2 financial years, so it covers both 2024-5 and 2025-6, and certainly the 24-5 allocations are likely to address the commitments to pay awards that have been significantly higher than were actually in the settlement, and greater than those that we actually built into our budget too. And as I've just said in the earlier report, we've had £6.1 million covering those various costs. The report then did go on to say that the much hangs on that Welsh Government settlement on the 10th of December. We do have really significant underlying pressures, £34 million. When we did that piece of work late summer, early autumn, we've had to undertake a similar exercise to the one we did last year. And at the moment, we've managed those pressures down to £23 million. But that still leaves a gap of 14.8. In managing them down to £23 million, we've had the discussion at SLT and with the administration that in managing them down, we can't be having some of those pressures coming through as overspends in the year. So there's been a lot of diligence and discussion around that. We're now at the stage of the year where we're working through the reshaping and efficiency programme to bridge that gap, and proposals come forward in January, which will be subject to public consultation and scrutiny. We're obviously reviewing the position in the light of the settlement we've had, and the report talked about as part of that review, a need to probably reassess the cost pressures which we're doing, and also the upward pressure on the council tax, given the unprecedented social care in schools pressures, and schools pressures certainly around ALN. Council continuing to lobby for the appropriate level of resource for local authorities, and certainly for a fairer funding settlement for the council on the schools funding block. We have lobbied quite hard, but as has the rest of the sector, for multi-year budget settlements, and certainly the Rachel Reeves' budget announcement did give a commitment to a 3-year spending review that will take place in the spring, and that's really welcome. The budget is being developed alongside, in parallel with the corporate plan. So we'll be drawing on that consultation work as well as last year's Life in the Vale work to inform the allocation of resources. But you'll no doubt agree with me that these remain really challenging times, and there's still a lot to be done. So that was the introduction in terms of what's in the report. Obviously, we've had the settlement last week. We're working through that. It's a more complicated settlement than we've perhaps had in the past, in that it's in 2 stages, in that there's some grant transfers into aggregate external finance in respect to those 2024-5 allocations we've had. And then there's the main 2025-6 settlement. Across Wales, the average is a 4.3% increase, so that's very much welcome. Certainly the Vale's not fared quite as well, where our increase is 3.4%. There's been quite a range of increases across Wales this year, certainly a greater range than perhaps in the past. I think councils such as Monmouthshire have only had a 2.8 draft settlement, and at the other end, Newport up at 5.6%. Where, as I've just said, we're now working through this along and doing that alongside finalising the reshaping and savings programme proposals. So I'll say introduction, but naturally happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you, Matt. Councillor Carroll, you have your hand up, so do you want to come in straight away? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Matt, for the presentation. I note your comments about the UK government's budget. It was just a question vis-à-vis the increase to national insurance and the impact that will have on the authority. Would you be able to enlighten us on that, please?
So that's one of the sort of unknowns at this stage. So the expectation, or well, not the expectation, what we've been told, is that it's going to be some way into the new calendar year that we actually find out how that money is going to flow to the public sector. There's £4.7 billion UK level, 200 million coming through to Wales. But those are indicative numbers for Wales. So what we're going to have to do in terms of our budget setting, we've been told that it applies to public sector directly employed staff. It will calculate that cost in our own against our own payroll, and then we'll on the cost side we'll have fairly accurate forecast of what the cost will be. But on the income side and our share of that, we're just going to have to model what we would typically see from a similar distribution. But certainly Treasury have been saying that they won't confirm those numbers or indicate what they are probably in as late as April or May, which is quite disappointing, really. At around the time of the settlement as well, there was a little bit of conjecture, speculation around what the definition of the public sector was, especially as there's quite a mixed economy, both in English authorities and Welsh ones, around the extent to which social care in particular is commissioned or directly delivered. But it has been clarified over recent weeks that there'll be no money flowing through to those commissioned elements of provision. So that's all I know at the moment.
So these are the non-directly employed staff, and indeed any costs that may be passed on by providers to the authority as a result of this increase. Has any modelling been done on the likely impacts that this will have on the council's budgets?
Yeah, modelling's been done on that, and that work sort of still being finalised, but those numbers will come through into the January report.
And so that will come to this committee then? Yeah,
and what we've it's quite difficult for us in terms of our reporting, because we know the resource management team, and it's already started really. They're obviously in negotiation with the providers, so we just need to be careful about how much we're reporting and presenting in our own papers about how much money we have available to meet the demands. Obviously, if we publish everything to the umpteenth degree, it makes our negotiating hand very weak.
So as things stand, do you think there's going to be a significant impact as a result of those changes on the authority?
Yeah, those the national insurance impact on the provider, it's not going to be tens or hundreds of thousands. It's going to be greater than that. It's a big number.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate the modelling is underway and the authority doesn't have all the information as yet at its disposal, because despite assurances that have been provided by the government, further detail hasn't been provided. But obviously this is something that this committee will need to watch very carefully, because the impacts are likely to be very profound. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carroll, and thank you, Matt, for sharing what you know on that matter. Councillor Goodjohn.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Firstly, I just want to say how fantastic it is to hear about the removal of the use of the Holiday Inn and B&B accommodation slowly occurring, which is going to save this for homeless people and putting them into temporary accommodation and homes a lot quicker, which is fantastic for them, of course, as people with dignity, and also saving the council quite a large amount of money, probably many millions in the coming years. So that's fantastic to see within this model. I just wanted to confirm some numbers with you first. So we were predicting a £2.1 million rise in the government grant. What we've received, I believe, is 7.3. I just want to check if that's right with you. I also wanted to check some of the savings, the cost pressure proposals. So first off, is everything that we've seen in the revenue monitoring report earlier, everything from there is still within the adjusted cost pressures. So we would definitely see, at least within in-year pressures, it all covered within these cost pressures. And secondly, I have to ask, because otherwise I'll never know, I want to know why Tom needs an additional coroner for corporate performance, just because I really wonder why. And it seems like, I don't know if it's a mistake in here, an additional coroner every year, it seems to be. I'm just fascinated why that's in there, just because it's quite out of place from the rest. If you don't ask, you'll never know. Thanks.
Yeah. So obviously the details of the settlement aren't in this report, and there'll be a full explanation and full detail of that in the January report. But that headline figure that you just cited is correct. We were forecasting 1%, which was a touch over £2 million, and the actual settlement's 3.4%, so we've got a 2.4% uplift on what we were expecting. We have, yes, in terms of the review of those cost pressures that were coming forward from the services in the £34 million, certainly we have taken forward all of those underlying budget pressures around transport, social care, ALN, and sort of in our sort of jargonistic way, we're right sizing the budget, so the budget contains the spend that we're already experiencing in the current financial year. The coroner, I don't know how many is in the coroner's team. I think it is just the coroner and some support staff. But we're staggered every year how much those costs go up. So I'm not aware of them appointing additional coroners. But yeah, every year their increases certainly outstrip any inflationary costs we put on any other external provision. So it is quite a frustration. I can probably safely say that on Tom's behalf too.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn, for those questions. Anybody else with any other questions on this particular agenda item, please? No, I see no hands. Okay, let's just roll on to the recommendations then. That was basically that we review the work and the mitigating cost pressures detailed in this report. And as we don't have any recommendations now to go back to Cabinet, we've just noted this report. So can I have a hand to move, please? Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. And a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Hanks. Thank you. Okay, let's move on swiftly then to agenda item 8. This is the reference from Cabinet on the 28th of November. This is the initial HRH, that's the Housing Revenue Account, revised budget for 24-25, and also the revised proposals for 25-26.
Yeah.
And back over to Matt again. Sorry, we're exhausting you tonight.
That's all right. So, as you've just said, this is the half-year position for 2024-5 and the draft budget proposals for 25-6. So, starting with the 24-5 position first, the headline is the HRA reserves forecast to increase by a further 590k at year end, and that'll take it up to £4.1 million. So that keeps the reserve at its policy level and a little bit above that in the face of some potential liabilities at that time. It's a small movement, but overall movement, but there are quite a number of individual movements contributing to that position. There are cost increases in excess of £1 million. The most notable are in respect of repairs, and we're certainly seeing some of the pressures I just talked about in the capital programme. There, significant inflationary and supply cost increases. Some of the additional works as well around damp and mould, and that's inspections and treatment, supplier uplifts, and also some additional electrical testing work as well. There's just minor pressure against some of the other cost headings, such as the employee pay awards. These have been offset in part by in-year savings and efficiencies of about £1 million. And again, this one major contributor, and that's around the provision for the bad and doubtful debt. And we're able to reduce that by about just short of 900k, and that's due to revised forecasts of the arrears at year end. So seeing an improving position there. There's also some minor adjustments around recharge of technical salaries, the capital programme, some investment income, and that's actually about 144k, so that's worth mentioning. And that's due to the higher reserve balances, and they've been earning us about 4.8%. The capital financing position is positive as well. Those costs have reduced, and that's in part to the borrowing that was anticipated on some of the 23-4 programme schemes coming through. But as you'll have seen in some of the reporting last year, a small measure of slippage coming forward on the housing development programme. And some of this is linked to, it does have a consequence of rental income. in that the stock isn't quite as large as had planned. And certainly one of the contributing factors there is Eagleswell, that's taken a little longer than planned to come into stock, but fully up and running now, which is really good news. The forecast level of capital met from revenue is down by £1 million, and that reflects the current profile of development and maintenance works in the capital programme. To some extent, that's effectively a balancing item, and we're able to ensure the reserves are held at their policy level. So there's some flexibility here as the capital programme is funded by a mix of revenue contributions and borrowing. So those are the headlines from 24/5, so generally healthy position. And then 2025/6, the initial proposals are being developed. It is quite a quick turnaround, so I'll say a couple of words about where we are with the actual final proposals that come through very early in the new year. But in terms of this report, there's committed growth of just over £2 million. Some of the similar factors here to the in-year pressures. So there's additional capital financing costs as the new stock comes into line, and repairs expenditure, those being the main drivers there. There will be then a corresponding increase in the rental income. That's due to increased stock, but also the annual increase in rents. We've been, in terms of this report, across the early autumn, modelling a 3% increase, and that's in line with the Welsh Government standard approach of a CPI plus 1% cap. And certainly during July and August, we were seeing inflation back at the government target that it gives Treasury of 2%, but it did have a little bit of a dip in September down to 1.7%, so the cap is confirmed at 2.7%, and actually helpfully Welsh Government have written through and confirmed that a little bit earlier than they have in previous years. Probably a good thing for our tenants, but obviously the inflation has picked up the subsequent 2 months. We've seen a further rise this month, just this morning. The next steps are set out at the end of the report, and allow for pre-scrutiny again, as we did in 2024/5. Personally, I thought the process that we had in 24/5 worked a lot better than the previous year. It's all very tight, but it's really important that scrutiny have an opportunity to see the draft plan first, ahead of it going to Cabinet, and then on to Council, and it'll go to Council on the 13th of January. So there's just one typo to draw your attention to in the report, and that's the heading in Table 4 in paragraph 212. The left-hand columns, I don't know why we're reading 23/4 and they should be 24/5. Naturally, we're quite late in the scrutiny cycle now, so the actual report is being finalised at the moment. That will be published on Monday, in readiness to go to Homes and Safe Communities. Scrutiny on the 8th of January, goes to Cabinet on the 9th, and then, as I've just said, on to Council on the 13th. So that's all I was going to say by way of introducing this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
So just for completeness, can I just say, with regard to this report as well, it was referred by Cabinet to Homes and Safe Communities. They considered it in November, but there were no comments to come to this committee. So this is just for your consideration now.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen. Yeah, that's good. Councillor Johnson, please ask your question.
Diolch.
Thank you for the presentation, Matt. Just a couple of questions. As this obviously was the report to start, and as you've just mentioned, the final report has now been completed. So I just wanted to ask a question on 2 points. There was one in relation to mentioning two amendments or improvements for housing repairs and increases in costs are 20% above that what was predicted. Is this because we've increased numbers, or are we just doing the same things each year, but the costs have increased? So that was the point. So just in relation to the repairs, and you've talked about services and mould and so forth, but are we helping more people, or are we doing more work, or have the costs have just increased? And the second point then relates to looking forward to next year. There's quite a substantial increase in the capital financing charges, which are based upon how much we expected to borrow in the current year, 24-25, and something that this report calls ambitious. And after a report or a meeting that we had on the previous item around the slippage into the next year, are we still anticipating the same figure for capital charges when the new report comes out on Monday? And just as a third point, and I'm sure it's something that I've asked not every year, but every other year, is just a bit of an explanation once again around what exactly SERA is in terms of capital expenditure from revenue account and how this works. Because it seems to me that people pay rent and I'm not sure exactly what happens with that money and where it's subsequently spent, and how this helps people in terms of housing repairs on the one side, but then of course it goes into spending on new things on the other side. So if you could just explain SERA to me once again, I'd really appreciate it.
Yeah. So the three questions, starting off with the repairs, it's a mix in truth. There are some cost increases, but there's also been probably a greater volume of work, especially around the mould and the electrical testing, for instance. So a mix of cost and volume. The capital financing charges, we're at that point of the year where we're working on the capital programme, the treasury strategy, the HRA, and what we do is attempt to have all of those in sync. So the HRA report, when it comes forward in January, will have be based on the latest anticipated capital programme delivery in the current financial year and the capital financing costs that will be incurred on the back of that. Obviously, if there's further slippage or change in the schedule of schemes during the rest of the year, we wouldn't be able to allow for that. I hope that makes sense. And then SERA capital expenditure from revenue. So we have to account for all capital expenditure through the capital programme. And in terms of repairs and maintenance, expenditure, I guess a simple example is a broken window would be revenue, but a replacement window with that would extend the life of the building would be capital. So they're all charged through the capital programme, and then we have a choice about how we fund those. So some of that capital expenditure will fund from borrowing, and then we'll incur the capital financing costs of that in future years through repayment of the principal and servicing the interest on that debt. But some of the capital programme will meet directly from the revenue budget in the HRA, and that's classed as SERA. I hope that's clear enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson and Matt. You had two of my questions there, Councillor Johnson. I didn't know what SERA was either. So, and I was curious as to the repair costs too. I've got one more for you, Matt, if that's okay. Table 2 on 2.5, it's a table showing HRA funding. And then we've got a column on land sales for each year. Next year, I think it's 600,000, 26, 27, a million, and 27, 28, 2.180 million. I'm just wondering, are we selling or are we buying? What are we selling? What represents those figures? That's all.
Yeah. So the that little CR afterwards, we probably should have put in full, and that's capital receipts. So those are sales. Yeah.
So it's not selling our land then.
It is sale of land.
Oh right. Do we know which particular bits of land, or is that not?
I don't. But I could find out for you.
Okay. Okay. I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Because we seem to have estimated the value of it, so that would be good to know if that's okay.
Yeah.
Thanks ever so much. Do we have any other questions for Matt on this particular topic? No? Councillor Johnston's back. Go on.
Can I just checking that? So this is capital receipts which come from the sale of Vale of Morgan land and are allocated to the housing revenue account. Is that?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. And just to check then, Chair, your question was, are these figures modelling something in particular, or are they just some dummy figures that have been put in?
Yeah, and Matt's going to come back to us. It can come back to us, not to the committee, as in a public, just so we can just because I'm curious, I'd like to know what's behind those figures. And I'm sure the rest of the committee would like to see that too. Thank you, Matt. So do we have any other questions on this particular topic? No? Okay. That's great. So the recommendations were basically that they go back to Cabinet. We don't have any recommendations, and neither did the previous committee that was also sent this document for scrutiny. So again, we'll just say that it's gone back and we've noted, if that's okay. Thank you, everybody. Can I have a hand to move then to the next agenda item? Thank you, Councillor Drake, and thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. So we're now moving on to agenda item 9. That's the report of the Director of Corporate Resources, and that's the annual delivery plan monitoring Q2 performance 2024-2025. I've just realised before I introduce you, Tom, that Matt has gone. So I just wanted to thank him. That was a long meeting and he had to answer all of those agenda items on his own. So thank you ever so much, Matt. And Tom, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. Good evening, committee. And this is the last of the Q2 reports on your agenda this evening. So this is the annual delivery plan Q2 monitoring report. Appendix A to the report gives committee members the overview of performance against the annual delivery plan and therefore the corporate plan at the end of month 6. Members will note that in Q1 we didn't have the RAG statuses, and as a result of feedback from committee members, we've made sure that those RAG statuses are put back into the report this quarter for you. So in terms of Appendix A, The first set of slides, so slides 2 to 7 of the presentation, give you a performance summary. That snapshot gives you an overview of the overall progress against all of the planned actions and all of the performance indicators aligned with the 4 wellbeing objectives right across all of the committees, and they give you a RAG status for each of those. Overall, the corporate plan is being reported as a green progress because only 6 of the actions out of a total of 361 have got a red status, and only 9 of the measures out of 48 have got a red status overall. Based again on feedback from committee, we've made sure that all of the exceptions are listed in the report for you to see. That gives you some commentary in terms of the reason for things being delayed and also the remedial actions which are proposed to address those things. For this committee's remit, I've been through the report to save members from having to do it, and there are 3 actions that are red and 1 measure that is red within the remit of your committee this evening, Chair. We're currently working towards producing that detail in committee-specific detail, and that will come forward in Q3. From slide 8 to 14 gives you committee-specific analysis of the Q2 performance. So it gives you an overview of the achievements that have been delivered within the first 6 months of this year. It also then looks at the actions that are in service plans that have not progressed as well as they should have done, and identify those as areas of improvement. So they're specifically related to service plan content. There's a section then around emerging areas of development and activity, and this is included to bring to the attention of elected members things that are aligned with service plans, but they may not be specific service plan actions. So we wanted to make sure that where things are cropping up within the year and we're doing something to address them, that we produce that and present it to committee. And then finally, there's a section on emerging areas of concern, so specifically within the committee's remit. And again, that's done to enable committee members to see some of the things that are starting to crop up and some of the themes that we're having to deal with. That's a really quick overview. Appendix B gives all of the information as usual for elected members on an action by action and measure by measure line, but I'd be happy to take any questions that committee members may have.
Thank you, Tom, for the presentation there. Committee members then, do we have any questions on the annual delivery plan monitoring Q2? Councillor Johnson, over to you, please.
Diolch, Dave.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask a question in relation to sewerage in Marcross at Penmark. I don't know if there's anything that Tom could add, but it's just a subject which has been discussed for quite a bit of time, and I don't know why the delays are ongoing. I don't know if Tom might have any information in relation to that.
Dear Councillor Johnson, thank you for the question. Apologies, I'm just coming out of the translation was giving me the reverberation that was having. I haven't got that information to hand, but I can certainly go away and ask relevant colleagues and come back to yourself and other committee members by email if that's okay with yourself, Councillor Johnson.
Okay. Yeah. Just well.
I think you might be on mute, Chair. Sorry.
It's been 2.5 hours in my defence.
It's been a long evening.
It's the first time I've done it tonight. So I've been doing well. Anybody else with any questions? And thank you for that one, Councillor Johnson. No? Okay, that's great. Well, Tom, thank you. That was all we needed to hear, obviously. Thank you very much. If we move on to recommendations, though, that was that our views of the committee be shared with Cabinet. But again, it appears that we're all quite satisfied with what we've heard. So there aren't really views to share. So we'll just say that we're noting this report and thank you for sharing it with us. Can I have a hand to move then on to the next agenda item, please, committee? Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. And a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Hanks. If we move then on to agenda item 10, that's items that the chair has decided are urgent part 1, and I don't have any. We'll move then on to part 2, which are in accordance with section 100A brackets 4 of the Local Government Act 1972. These are items that we would hear if we had any in private, and there aren't any of those either. So that means that I can, at this stage of the meeting, thank everybody for their participation and for all their questions. I thought it was a good debate. Enjoyed everybody's company, so thank you ever so much. Our next meeting now will be in 2025. I think it's January the 22nd. Karen, am I right? I think I must be because she hasn't come back to me. So we'll take it that it's January 22nd, 2025. And wish everybody a lovely evening. Hope you have a nice break, bit of rest, and I look forward to seeing you all again in the new year. Thanks, everybody.